In the space of a few months, my then wife, who was running a cellar in Greenwich Village, the Roman Tavern I think it was called, decided to exhibit my watercolors. No one except a few close friends knew that we were man and wife. If she mentioned my name in public, it was always, "My friend, the writer." Strange that no one ever asked me the titles of my non-existent books. Except for the mezzotints which we sold from door to door, nothing of mine had as yet appeared in print, not even in a local newspaper. Because of the peculiar life we were then leading, the underground life I always call it, I rarely visited this Roman tavern of hers. When I did, you would think the Prince of Wales had appeared. Usually there were never more than a half-dozen clients in the joint at any time. They were the same types one sees today in any bohemia. All talkers, pretenders, spongers, hangers-on, like myself. "So you've taken up painting, have you?" someone would say, and I would nod. Whereupon there would follow a painful inspection of my watercolors, accompanied by the usual irrelevant, asinine, highbrow comments. Not being able to vanish through the floor, I would put my tail between my legs and scoot. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, my wife would walk in and blandly ask why I had run away, adding that the fellow in question had really liked my work. "You should have heard what he said about you after you left." My answer to such remarks usually was, "Have you brought anything to eat?" If she had, I would fall to like a famished wolf, and then, in the manner of the insane, resume watercoloring till dawn. Not a penny in it, of course. A crazy life, what? Particularly in view of the fact that I was supposed to be at work on the great American novel. Now and then, of course, I did write a few pages. Often they made no sense whatever. I tapped merely to salve my conscience. My dodge now was watercolors. I dabbled in them, as the expression goes. It was a joy to go on turning them out like a madman, perhaps because I didn't have to prove anything, either to the world or myself. I wasn't hepped on becoming a painter, not at all. I was simply wriggling out of the straitjacket. Small wonder that painting is offered as therapy in our mental institutions. Years later, rereading The Birth of Tragedy, I was electrified by Nietzsche's therapeutic lines concerning the healing power of art. Strangely enough, I was again in a desperate plight. Having written the Tropic books and a few others to boot, I was back in my native land as penniless as when I left it 10 years earlier. Again I'm painting watercolors, this time not to while away the time or stave off madness, but to requite my numerous benefactors for their kindness in sending me little sums of money, clothing, food, umbrellas, painting materials, and so on. Was I to take offense because the generous soul offering me $2 demanded one of my good watercolors? One of my quondam benefactors had the cheek to ask for a brace of watercolors, saying that the $2 he was transmitting ought to prove ample. I did as he requested, and without a word of sarcasm. After all, how could a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy be expected to know the value of a watercolor? Sometimes I wonder if, like the Marquis de Sade, I shall spend my closing days in an asylum, painting delightful little watercolors for the other inmates. The Marquis, it will be remembered, staged and directed his own plays for the inmates of the asylum in which he was confined. What a joy it must have been for him to find such an outlet, and what a tragedy when, to the satisfaction of his lifelong persecutors, he was ousted from the asylum. Like Rembrandt, he died in the gutter. I hope I do not give the impression that I take to making watercolors only when desperate. Most of my painting periods have been delightful ones. One of them, like an attack of measles, occurred in a little village outside Paris, where my only companion was a fierce, oversized dog who knocked me down every time he greeted me. Occasionally he would sit and watch me paint. During these sessions, I found that I could hold communication with him. If he didn't approve of the job I had done, he would walk on it, piss on it, or chew it to pieces. We had remarkable talks now and then such figures as Fra Angelico, Bruegel the Elder, Mantegna, even Piranesi. When he had had enough, he would simply curl up before the fire and go to sleep. I would then continue the discussion by myself. To work alongside another painter, a serious one, is a great privilege. I had the opportunity once in New York of painting with Abe Ratner in his studio. I had some misgivings at first as to the effect which my presence would have on his work. After a day or two, what with my humming and whistling, my boyish enthusiasm, my 101 questions, he was enchanted, or professed to be. He even abandoned the huge crucifixion he was working on to do some watercolors himself. The way in which the maestro proceeded to go about it was an eye-opener. It was the best instruction I ever received, and nary a word spoken. Lilich Schatz, who inveigled me into doing the nightlife opus with him, was another painter who delighted in having me by his side while he worked. Apart from my friend Emil Schnellock, no one has given me as much encouragement as he. Himself, he never made watercolors. The medium was too flu for him, as he used to say. But everything I did excited his interest and curiosity. He never thought it strange or disturbing that I was so lacking in technique, that I had no sense of perspective, that I did everything the wrong way. I always had the impression that he saw and applauded what I intended to do. Yet he was not uncritical. What he deplored was lack of feeling, lack of daring. Do anything you like, he would say, but do it with conviction. In moments of enthusiasm over the juicy colors he was squeezing onto his palette, he would declare that he loved them, the colors, so much he could eat them right out of the tube. It was he who introduced me to cadmium red light. I never liked the cadmium reds, still don't, but cadmium red light sends me. I'm crazy about yellow ochre, too, and gamboge and Indian yellow. Dangerous colors to play with, I'm told. Crimson alizarin is another dangerous favorite. As for chromium oxide and viridian, they leave me cold. Give me rose madder, scarlet lake, or rose Tyrienne, and I'm in heaven. It's impossible to talk of colors without lapsing into Nijinsky's lingo. Whenever Nijinsky named a certain country, which was dear to him, he had to mention all the other countries he also loved, always full circle. I make mention of these various colors only by way of saying that it was thus we often passed a wonderful evening, merely reeling off the names of the colors and expatiating on their qualities. It was a drunken, sentimental kind of talk, thoroughly euphoric. The sort that sometimes takes place over the dinner table when the person opposite you begins extolling the virtues of certain wines. The names of good wines is even more intoxicating, thanks to the associations they call up, than the names of Winsor and Newton tubes. The pity is that colors can't be eaten or drunk except with the eyes. Of course, there is no color which is good in itself. A good red needs a good blue or a good green to stand next to it. With wines, it's different. One doesn't have to taste a poor wine in order to appreciate the excellence of a good one. With colors, as I say, it's all a question of contiguity, what other colors they are limitrophe to. Even a cadmium red light won't show up to advantage beside a Van Dyke brown or some other dingy companion. Something of the sort might also be said for good wines. One can hardly appreciate the excellence of a Nuit Saint-Georges, for instance, while putting away a corned beef and cabbage. But to come back to the painters I have known, all lovable souls, and some, like Man Ray and Buford Delaney, possessed of a wisdom altogether uncommon. There is one man I must make space for, though he was not a painter. I mean Alfred Stieglitz. It was only toward the end of his life that I got to know Stieglitz at the gallery called An American Place. Naturally, I had heard and read about Stieglitz ever since I had come of age, but not until I met him did I realize what a force he was. Every time I visited An American Place, I came away inspired. No one had ever talked painting to me the way Stieglitz did. It wasn't his talk alone either, but the look in his eyes which accompanied it. That he was not a painter amazed me. Perhaps he had been at one time. I never asked. If ever the artist had a friend, a spokesman, a champion defender, it was in the person of Alfred Stieglitz. Coming upon him fresh from Europe, I was enchanted by his vigorous, youthful spirit, his unique way of looking at things. He was one of the very few Americans I have met whose approach to a work of art inspired reverence for the artist, for his work, for art itself. Lucky for us who came under his spell that he was not a painter, that he had created for himself the role of interpreter and defender. At the time we met, it was John Marin whom Stieglitz talked about endlessly. No matter whose work was being exhibited, it was always Marin whom we came back to. And then one day Marin walked in and I was introduced to him. His talk, I remember, left me thoroughly unimpressed. Even a most ordinary French painter could express himself far better than John Marin. It was his personality, his looks, which fascinated me. He was a weirdie, and that fugitive bang he sported only accentuated his bizarre, druidic look. He was also very American, an ingrained one. I could easily picture him, back at the turn of the century, playing billiards in the rear of the Café Trois Mousquetaires on the Avenue du Maine, or dining at the Place du Tertre with Douanier Rousseau and Max Weber. Finally, he invited me to visit him at his home in some godforsaken place in New Jersey. Here I really got to grips with him. While examining a trunk full of watercolors he had never exhibited, he demonstrated to me how he painted with both hands at once. I would have been happy to acquire the facility of that left hand alone. These two men is now part of the story of American art. Knowing what they meant to one another, I could not help but see Stieglitz in every watercolor Marin painted. His image was embedded in the paper, like that angel I once wrote of, which I could never scrub out. How fortunate was John Marin to have such a lifelong friend. Usually, the artist has two lifelong companions, neither of his own choosing. I mean, poverty and loneliness. To have a friend who understands and appreciates your work, one who never lets you down, but who becomes more devoted, more reverent as the years go by, that is a rare experience. It takes only one friend, if he is a man of faith, to work miracles. How distressing it is to hear young painters talking about dealers, shows, newspaper reviews, rich patrons, and so on. All that comes with time, or will never come. But first, one must make friends, create them through one's work. What sustains the artist is the look of love in the eyes of the beholder. Not money, not the right connections, not exhibitions, not flattering reviews. I think of my friend Buford Delaney, the amazing and invariable Buford Delaney as I christened him. The man doesn't know what money is. He has never tasted success, never lived anything but a hole-and-corner existence. But what a wealth of